The warship's presence loomed like a shadow over the galaxy. It had arrived without warning, without mercy, and with a power no one had anticipated. The Galactic Council, once the undisputed rulers of the galaxy, now found themselves facing an enemy that was not just stronger, but far more advanced than anything they had ever encountered. Inside the Council's war room, Salren, the leader, stood in front of a massive holographic map, his eyes scanning the positions of the remaining Council fleets. The galaxy's most powerful ships, the ones that had once struck fear into the hearts of any who opposed them, now seemed like toys compared to the human warship. The Council had thrown everything they had at it, but humanity's ship had simply swatted them away like insects. "Commander Zalrin, the situation is dire," Virith said, his voice shaking with fear. "We've lost nearly half of our fleet already. Their weapons, they're unlike anything we've ever seen. One shot can destroy an entire ship in an instant. We can't fight them like this." Zalrin clenched his fists, a surge of frustration boiling inside him. His people were trained to conquer, to dominate. They had conquered star systems, annihilated enemies, and ruled for centuries. But now, all of that was in jeopardy. The human warship was something they couldn't defeat with sheer power. It wasn't just a ship, it was a force. "I know," Zalrin muttered, pacing back and forth. "But we can't give up. We can't let humanity rewrite the entire galaxy." He turned to his officers, each one standing with grim expressions. Some were ready to surrender, to admit that the Council's reign was over. Others, like Zalrin, were determined to keep fighting, at least for a chance to preserve something of their legacy. "What options do we have?" Zalrin demanded. "Is there anything left?" Perhaps a last-ditch effort," Virith said, almost hesitantly. "We've been working on a new type of weapon, but it's still incomplete. It's not nearly as powerful as we need, but it could buy us some time. We can try using it to disable their weapons or disrupt their shields." Zalrin's heart sank. How long would it take to deploy? "Too long," Virith answered. "It's still in the testing phase. The humans won't give us that kind of time. They've already shown they're willing to wipe us out without hesitation." Zalrin stood silently for a moment, the weight of the galaxy pressing down on him. He thought about the people of his homeworld, his family, and the countless beings across the galaxy who depended on the Council's rule. If humanity destroyed the Council, what would become of them? Would the galaxy fall into chaos? Would their empire be erased forever? But then, a chilling thought crossed his mind. What if that's exactly what humanity wants? "Commander," another officer, Tellan, spoke up. "We've intercepted a new transmission from the warship. They're demanding we stand down again. They want us to surrender completely. This time, they've targeted our homeworld. If we don't comply, they'll destroy it. They're giving us an ultimatum." Zalrin felt a coldness creep up his spine. The human warship had proven it wasn't just about military strength. It wasn't about conquering. At least not in the traditional sense. It was about forcing the galaxy to change, to submit. Humanity was determined to break the old order and bring something new to the galaxy, whether the Council liked it or not. "Send the message back," Zalrin ordered, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "Tell them we'll never surrender. If we fall fighting." But deep down, he wasn't sure how much longer they could fight. They were out of time, out of options, and facing an enemy who knew exactly how to break them. As the remaining Council fleets gathered for what would likely be their final stand, Zalrin felt the weight of the galaxy's future resting on his shoulders. The fleets were ready, though battered. They were prepared to face the human warship head-on, even if the odds were against them. But the Council's ships were like children playing with fire compared to the immense power of humanity's warship. The battlefield was set in a desolate part of the galaxy, far from any populated systems. The Council had chosen this location, hoping to minimize civilian casualties in what they knew would be a hopeless battle. "Commander, the enemy is approaching," one of the officers said. "They're on our radar." They're not coming in fast. They're moving slowly, as if they know they don't need to rush. Zalrin could feel his pulse quicken as the massive silhouette of the human warship came into view, hanging in the darkness of space like a predatory beast. The warship wasn't just a weapon, it was a statement. Humanity had come to claim what was theirs, and the galaxy would bow to their will. The Council's fleet moved into position, waiting for Zalrin's order. He gave the signal, and the first volley of energy beams erupted from their ships. But before the beams even reached their target, the human warship raised its shields, effortlessly absorbing the blasts without so much as a scratch. It didn't fire back immediately. It didn't need to. The Council's forces were nothing more than a nuisance. Instead, the warship deployed a sonic pulse, a terrifying shockwave of energy that ripped through space, hitting the Council's ships with devastating force. Shields shattered, hulls cracked, and ships exploded in flashes of light. Zalrin's heart sank as he watched his fleet disintegrate before his eyes. The few ships that managed to survive were scattered, fleeing in all directions. There was no strategy, no hope of survival. Humanity's warship was simply too powerful. "Commander, the fleet is in disarray," Virith shouted. "We need to retreat, now." But Zalrin stood frozen, staring at the warship on the view screen. He knew they couldn't outrun it. There was nowhere to go. Humanity had already won. The galaxy was no longer theirs to control. The warship fired again. This time, it didn't target the fleet. Instead, it aimed directly at one of the Council's planets, the one where Zalrin's homeworld lay. A single shot, and the planet was reduced to rubble, a cloud of debris scattering into the void. Zalrin's chest tightened, his mind struggling to process the sight. He had failed. Everything he had fought for, everything the Council had built, was gone. The warship, like an unstoppable force, had crushed it all. But there was something else in the depths of his mind. Fear, yes, but also a deep sense of realization. Humanity had not just come to destroy. They had come to change everything. And now, the galaxy would be reshaped in their image. As the last of the Council's ships scattered into the void, Zalrin understood. They were no longer in control. The warship had proven it. The galaxy had been claimed, and humanity's reign had begun. The immense warship loomed over the galaxy like a dark, unstoppable force. Its arrival had shaken the foundations of the Galactic Council, a power once unrivaled, now teetering on the edge of destruction. As it neared Council space, a sense of dread and helplessness gripped the heart of every officer, every leader. No one could deny the truth. The Council's might, once a symbol of supremacy, was now a shadow of its former self, unable to match the power that humanity had seemingly resurrected. Zalrin, the Council's commander, stood in the war room, watching the warship approach. His mind raced, trying to grasp the full scope of the situation. This was no ordinary military vessel. It was something beyond their understanding. The ship moved with an eerie precision, its intentions clear yet unfathomable. The signals it sent out were cryptic, yet the message was undeniable. Humanity, thought to be long lost, had returned with a force that could bring the entire galaxy to its knees. "The ship's shields are impenetrable," Virith, one of the senior officers, reported. His voice trembled with unease. "Our weapons have no effect. We've tried everything." Zalrin's eyes were fixed on the view screen, where the warship hovered ominously. He had seen many battles in his time, but nothing like this. There had been no warning, no negotiation, just an overwhelming display of power. Humanity had always been seen as a relic of the past, a civilization that had faded into obscurity after the Great War. But now they had returned, and they weren't here to make peace. They were here to reclaim what was theirs. "They're demanding we stand down," another officer said, her voice tight with fear. "If we don't comply, they will destroy us." Zalrin clenched his fists, a surge of anger rising within him. For centuries, the Council had ruled the galaxy. They had crushed rebellions, annihilated enemies, and brought peace through their dominance. But now, standing on the edge of a confrontation with this mysterious human warship, all of that seemed meaningless. There was no strategy, no plan that could match this level of threat. "They're not here to negotiate," Zalrin said, his voice low, almost to himself. He knew that the warship wasn't interested in diplomacy. It was a declaration of war, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. If they did nothing, they would be wiped out. If they fought, they risked losing everything. But surrendering was unthinkable. They had never been the type to bow to anyone, certainly not to a species believed to be extinct. Virith looked at Zalrin with wide, fearful eyes. "We're facing annihilation, Commander. This warship, it's not just a weapon. It's a message. Humanity is back, and they want to take the galaxy back." Zalrin nodded slowly, his mind racing. He had to make a decision, a choice that would decide the fate of the Council, the galaxy, and their very way of life. The enemy was stronger, smarter, and far more advanced. The old methods of war, the battleships, the advanced weapons, the strategies of attrition, were meaningless against such overwhelming power. "We cannot show weakness," Zalrin said, his voice hardening with resolve. "We stand our ground. We show them that we will never bow." As he spoke, the human warship's weapons powered up. It didn't fire immediately, but Zalrin knew it was waiting, watching, observing their every move. The Council's fleet, in all its glory, was mere seconds away from being torn apart. And yet, despite the overwhelming odds, Zalrin's mind began to form a plan. They couldn't defeat this warship head-on, but maybe they could find a way to outsmart it. Humanity had returned, but the Council still held one advantage: knowledge of the galaxy's weaknesses, its blind spots, and its hidden paths. He turned to his officers. "Prepare the fleet for a counterattack. We'll lure them into the void and use the system's gravity wells to our advantage. If we can't destroy them, we can at least slow them down. We'll force them into a fight they don't expect." The officers hesitated for a moment, unsure whether the plan would even work. But Zalrin's confidence, even if feigned, gave them a glimmer of hope. It was their only option. They had no time to waste. Zalrin gave the order, and the fleet began to move. The ships scattered, weaving in and out of the system's debris fields, hoping to use the asteroids and shattered moons to their advantage. The human warship followed, as if it already knew their every move. It didn't hesitate, didn't falter. Each of its actions seemed calculated, precise. Suddenly, the warship fired a beam of energy so powerful that it sliced through the heart of the nearest Council ship in an instant. The ship disintegrated, leaving nothing behind but space dust. Zalrin felt a cold shiver run down his spine as he watched the display. Their plan was failing, and failing fast. "We have to do something," one of the officers shouted. "We can't outrun them." Zalrin's eyes darted across the room, his mind desperate for an answer. They needed a way to counter the warship's devastating firepower, a way to turn the tide before it was too late. But as the warship closed in, he realized something terrifying. The human ship wasn't just attacking. It was waiting. The warship wasn't here to destroy them completely. It was here to force them into submission. Humanity had returned not just as conquerors, but as judges of the galaxy's future. In that moment, Zalrin knew that the galaxy was about to enter a new age, one where the Council would no longer have a place. But there was one thing he still didn't understand. What did humanity truly want? And more importantly, would the Council survive long enough to find out? The warship's message had been clear, but the more the Council tried to make sense of it, the more questions arose. Humanity had returned, not as a scattered, forgotten race, but as a power that could dominate the galaxy with a mere flick of a switch. They weren't invaders. They weren't conquerors in the traditional sense. They were something much worse, a force of nature, bringing with them a vision that would reshape the galaxy forever. And the Council, in all their wisdom and power, had no idea how to stop them. Zalrin stood in the command center, feeling the weight of the galaxy pressing down on him. The Council had always been the embodiment of order. Their fleets, their warships, and their diplomacy had kept the galaxy in check for centuries. Now, with a single ship, the human warship, sweeping through their systems, all of that felt meaningless. This wasn't just a battle. This was a reckoning. Humanity had come to reclaim what they believed was rightfully theirs. The holographic display before Xalran flickered, showing the vast fleet of the human warship as it cut through the outer systems. The fleet's advanced technology was beyond anything the Council had ever encountered. It was like fighting a storm, something so powerful and untouchable that no matter how many ships the Council threw at it, the warship remained unscathed. "Sir, the enemy has entered the inner systems," said Varith, his voice trembling. "They've disabled all our defensive platforms. If we don't act now, we'll lose everything." Xalran's mind raced. There had to be something they could do. Humanity's warship was strong, but surely there was a weakness, something they could exploit. He glanced at the star maps on the wall, his eyes scanning for any possible advantage. But the more he looked, the more it became clear that the Council was outmatched in every way. The warship's weapons could decimate entire fleets, and its shields were virtually impenetrable. Their advanced technology was beyond anything Xalran had seen. It was as if the ship itself was alive, an extension of its creator's will. "They've stopped advancing," an officer reported, looking up from his console. "They've set a course to the center of our fleet. It's as if they want us to attack them." Xalran stared at the screen. The warship's intentions were clear. It wanted the Council to make the first move. The human leaders, it seemed, were testing the Council's resolve, seeing if they would continue to fight or bow down and surrender. They wanted to push the Council to the brink of desperation, to see how far they would go before submitting. "Are they sending another message?" Xalran asked, though he already knew the answer. "Yes, Commander. They're demanding we stand down," the officer replied. "This time, they're offering us a choice: join humanity in reshaping the galaxy, or face total annihilation." Xalran's heart sank. It was not just a fight for survival anymore. It was a battle of ideologies. Humanity wasn't interested in merely destroying the Council. They wanted to reshape the galaxy, to redefine what it meant to rule. And the Council was standing in the way of that vision. "They want us to surrender, but we can't," Xalran muttered under his breath. "We can't let them change everything. The galaxy will never be the same again if we bow to them." Varith looked at Xalran, his eyes filled with fear. "But what if we can't win? What if the warship is unstoppable?" Xalran took a deep breath. His mind was clouded with doubt, but he could not let that show. He had to stay strong. For the Council, for the galaxy. But deep down, a part of him couldn't help but question the futility of it all. Humanity's technology was too advanced, their intentions too clear. It was almost as if they had been waiting for this moment to return, to reclaim the galaxy as their own. He turned to his officers. "Prepare for the final battle. We have no choice but to fight. They may be stronger, but we can't let them think we'll just roll over. Not without a fight." With that, Xalran gave the order for the fleet to mobilize. The Council's remaining ships began to move into formation, their weapons primed and shields raised. It was a last-ditch effort to slow the warship down, to buy time, even if it meant sacrificing everything. As the Council fleet entered the heart of the battle zone, Xalran couldn't shake the feeling that they were already lost. The warship remained eerily silent, its massive form sitting in the middle of space, like an all-powerful predator waiting for its prey to make the first move. Then, without warning, the human warship fired. A single beam of energy ripped through the heart of one of the Council's largest battleships, reducing it to molten metal in an instant. The other ships in the fleet scattered, trying to avoid the oncoming blasts, but it was clear that their attempts were futile. No matter how fast they maneuvered, the warship's targeting systems were simply too advanced. The Council was being torn apart, piece by piece. Zalrin watched in horror as ship after ship was destroyed, their crews lost in the blink of an eye. It was a massacre, and the warship didn't even seem to be trying. It wasn't just overpowering the Council, it was dismantling their spirit, breaking them down mentally as well as physically. They couldn't fight something this powerful. They couldn't win. He clenched his fists, his mind spinning. There had to be something, some way of turning this around. But all he could see were flashes of destruction. The warship fired again, and another Council ship disappeared into nothingness. "We can't keep this up," Virith said, his voice barely audible over the noise of the battle. "We need to retreat now." But Zalrin refused. Retreat would mean total surrender. The Council had never backed down from a fight, and he wasn't going to start now. "Prepare to initiate the final defense protocol," Zalrin ordered. He had one last card to play, a weapon that had been kept in reserve, something the Council had hoped never to use. But now, in this moment of desperation, it was their only hope. The officer at the terminal looked at Zalrin, hesitation in his eyes. "Are you sure, Commander? This is our last chance. We're talking about using a weapon that could destroy everything around us, including our own fleet." Zalrin's gaze never wavered. "We have no choice. If we don't fight back now, we'll lose everything." He wasn't sure if it would work. He wasn't sure if there was even a chance they could survive. But one thing was certain. The Council had to make a stand. Even if it meant the end of everything they had fought for, they would not let humanity take the galaxy without one last battle. As the countdown ticked down to the final moments, Zalrin's thoughts flashed back to everything he had known about the Galactic Council. Its triumphs, its wars, its rise to power. This was supposed to be a symbol of their strength, their unyielding resolve. Now, in the face of humanity's worship, it felt like all of that was slipping away. Yet despite the overwhelming odds, a part of him refused to accept defeat. He couldn't let his people be wiped out without fighting for their survival. The Council's fleet had been shattered, and there were only a few ships left, scattered across the black void of space. But Zalrin still had one card to play. It was a weapon they had developed in secret, one that could turn the tide in the most desperate of situations. It was a last resort, a powerful pulse that could disrupt even the most advanced shields, perhaps even the human warships. But it was a gamble. The weapon had never been fully tested, and there was no guarantee that it would work. If it failed, the Council's remaining fleet would be wiped out, and humanity would have free rein to destroy whatever remained of their empire. Yet, if it succeeded, it might buy them enough time to escape, or, at the very least, to send a message to humanity that the Council was not finished yet. Final defense protocol activated. The officer at the terminal reported, his voice laced with tension. "We're ready to fire on your command, Commander." Zalrin nodded slowly, his heart heavy. His eyes locked onto the view screen, where the human warship loomed ominously, its weapons glowing with an almost predatory anticipation. It had already wiped out most of the Council's fleet without breaking a sweat, but Zalrin knew this would be different. The weapon they were about to fire wasn't just powerful, it was designed to disrupt the very energy that fueled advanced technology. "This is it," Zalrin muttered. "We have one shot." He gave the order to fire. The weapon activated with a deafening hum, sending a massive pulse of energy hurtling toward the human warship. For a moment, there was silence. Then the pulse collided with the warship's shields. To Zalrin's surprise, the human ship didn't immediately retaliate. Instead, it seemed to waver, its shields flickering, as if the energy from the pulse had disrupted their systems. It was working. The warship's defenses were faltering. "We've got it," one of the officers shouted, a note of disbelief in his voice. "Their shields are down." But just as the Council's remaining ships prepared to launch a coordinated strike, the warship's response was swift and terrifying. The shields flickered back to full strength in a split second, and before the Council fleet could capitalize on their brief advantage, the human ship fired a devastating beam of energy. This time, the blast wasn't aimed at just one ship. It swept across the battlefield, hitting multiple Council vessels at once. The energy was so powerful that it incinerated entire ships, leaving behind nothing but a cloud of glowing debris. Zalrin's heart sank as he watched the destruction unfold. The pulse had worked for a moment, but humanity had anticipated this and responded with greater strength. They were prepared. They weren't going to let the Council win, not even for a moment. "Commander," Virith shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "We need to fall back. We've lost too many ships. If we stay here, we'll all be destroyed." Zalrin clenched his fists, his mind racing. There was no way to win this battle. He knew that now. But as he looked at the view screen, he realized something even more terrifying. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for control of the galaxy, a fight to prevent humanity from remaking everything in their image. The warship fired again, and another wave of Council ships was obliterated. Only a handful remained, scattered, their remaining crews desperate for escape. "We can't outrun them," Virith said, his voice hollow. "They've already won." Zalrin felt his shoulders slump as the truth settled in. Humanity's warship wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of a new order, one that was destined to replace the old. The Council had tried to resist, tried to fight back, but it was all for nothing. Humanity had come to claim the galaxy, and there was no stopping them. "Fall back," Zalrin ordered quietly, his voice breaking through the tension in the room. "Take the remaining ships into the nebula. We'll make our last stand there. But if it's the end, we go out fighting." The officers hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to follow his orders, but they knew there was no other choice. The Council's power was broken. They had lost. And with that realization, the fleet began to retreat, leaving behind the last remnants of their once proud empire. As the ships fled into the nebula, Zalrin couldn't shake the feeling of despair. There was no future for the Council now. The galaxy was shifting, evolving in ways they hadn't prepared for. Humanity had come not just to destroy, but to remake. The Council's time had passed, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The human warship followed them, its presence a constant reminder of the new reality they now faced. The battle was lost, but the war for the future of the galaxy, was just beginning. And as the Council's fleet disappeared into the depths of space, Zalrin understood one thing. The galaxy was no longer theirs to control. Humanity had not just claimed the galaxy, they had redefined it. As the last remaining ships of the Galactic Council disappeared into the nebula, their fate seemed sealed. The human warship, unyielding and powerful, had brought the once glorious empire to its knees. There was no more talk of victory, no more whispers of resistance. Only the cold, unfeeling void of space remained. The Council's might had crumbled in the face of humanity's superior technology and overwhelming presence. Zalrin stood at the command console of the last surviving flagship, staring into the depths of the nebula. His thoughts were distant, consumed by the magnitude of what had just happened. He had fought to protect the legacy of the Council, to defend everything they had built over centuries of conquest and control. But now it was all slipping away. The fleet was broken. The war was lost. And humanity. Humanity had come not just to fight, but to reshape everything. "Commander," Virith's voice broke through his thoughts, hesitant and somber. "The fleet's been scattered. The warship is still following us, tracking our movements. We can't outrun it. We're sitting ducks in here." Zalrin glanced at the star maps on the console. The nebula offered some refuge, but not much. The human warship was not far behind, and its pursuit was relentless. It had already decimated most of the Council's forces. There was no way to hide from it for long. And now, with the few remaining ships, they were cornered, trapped. The warship's presence was everywhere. The Council had thought itself invincible, a power that would never be dethroned, but humanity's return had shattered that illusion. They were no longer the rulers of the galaxy. Humanity's message was loud and clear. The galaxy was theirs now. The old order had been broken, and a new one was rising. Zalrin turned away from the console, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "We won't run any longer," he said, his voice hard and determined. "We'll make our last stand here." Virith's eyes widened. "Commander, are you certain? We've lost everything already. There's no reason to." "We have no other choice," Zalrin interrupted. "We'll make them pay for every ship they've destroyed. Even if it's the end, we'll show humanity that the Council never goes down without a fight." He turned to the rest of his officers. The remnants of the fleet, though small and fragmented, were still filled with soldiers and officers who had sworn an oath to defend the Council. They had fought for this moment, this very second, and now they would die for it. Zalrin had no illusions of winning, but he couldn't let humanity believe that the galaxy had been handed to them so easily. "We'll prepare to engage," Zalrin said. "Even if we cannot defeat them, we will force them to understand that the Council's legacy cannot be erased without a fight." The officers nodded, moving quickly to prepare the remaining ships for the final confrontation. Zalrin could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was not a battle to be won. It was a battle of pride. It was a final message to humanity that the galaxy had once belonged to the Council, and though their empire might be crumbling, they would not go silently into the night. "Commander, the warship is closing in," Virith reported. "It will be within firing range in minutes." Zalrin took one last look at the nebula outside the view screen. The swirling clouds of gas and dust provided a beautiful but deceptive veil. Beneath it, the truth was brutal. The warship would be upon them soon, and their fates would be sealed. There was no escaping this. But Zalrin couldn't let the last remnants of the Council simply fold. They had to go out fighting. The remaining ships moved into position, their weapons powered up, ready for what would undoubtedly be their final battle. It was a futile effort, a desperate last attempt to preserve what little dignity the Council had left. But Zalrin felt a strange sense of resolve. This would be the Council's legacy, to stand against impossible odds, even in the face of total annihilation. The human warship's massive form loomed in the distance, its weapons glowing as it prepared for the kill. Zalrin watched as the targeting systems of their remaining ships locked onto the enemy. It was a futile gesture, a final show of resistance, but it was all they had left. Without warning, the warship fired first, its beams of energy tearing through the darkness of space and slamming into the nearest Council ship. The ship exploded in a burst of light, sending debris scattering in every direction. The remaining ships scattered in all directions, evading the incoming fire, but Zalrin knew it was pointless. They couldn't evade forever. The warship fired again, and another Council ship was destroyed. Then another. The battlefield was silent except for the occasional explosion, the last desperate cries of ships trying to escape a fate they knew was inevitable. Zalrin's eyes narrowed as he watched the human warship approach. There was no escape, no way to turn the tide. All that was left was to make sure humanity knew that the Council had fought until the very end. "Prepare to engage at maximum power," Zalrin ordered. His voice was calm, but his heart was pounding in his chest. His ship had been hit multiple times, but they were still holding on. It was only a matter of time now. As the warship closed in, he could feel the weight of history bearing down on him. This was the moment that would define the end of an era. The galaxy was about to change forever, and the Council would no longer be a part of it. A sudden explosion shook the flagship, and Zalrin was thrown against the console. The ship's lights flickered, and alarms blared. The warship had fired once again, and this time, the damage was severe. "Commander," Virith shouted, panic in his voice. "We've lost power to the main reactor. We're drifting." Zalrin gritted his teeth. There was no time. The warship was closing in for the kill. "Prepare the emergency pods," Zalrin said through gritted teeth. "We have no choice. Abandon ship. Get everyone out of here. The Council may fall, but we will live to fight another day." As the crew began to evacuate, Zalrin stood alone on the bridge, staring out at the warship. Humanity had won. The galaxy would never be the same again. But even in the face of defeat, Zalrin knew one thing. This was not the end. Humanity had come for the galaxy, and the Council had fought until the bitter end. The war might be lost, but the story of the Council would live on in the hearts of those who had dared to resist. In the end, the galaxy would remember the Council, not as rulers, but as those who fought until the last breath. And though humanity had taken the galaxy, it was clear that the fight for the future was far from over. The silence that followed the explosion felt almost suffocating. Zalrin's breath was ragged, but he forced himself to stay composed. The control room was in disarray, sparks flying from terminals, the sound of emergency alarms ringing in the distance. The damage was irreparable. The flagship was barely holding together, and his officers were scrambling to evacuate. Zalrin watched as the remaining crew members raced for the escape pods. He had given the order. His mind, still sharp despite the chaos, was consumed by a single overwhelming thought. The war was lost. The Council had been defeated. The galaxy was now in humanity's hands. And yet there was something else gnawing at him, a realization that he couldn't quite put into words. Humanity had come to reshape the galaxy, yes, but what if this war wasn't the end? What if it was just the beginning of something far larger than anyone, even humanity, could control? The warship loomed in the distance, its form immense and terrifying. The human fleet had decimated everything in its path, leaving only scattered remnants of the once mighty Council. But it wasn't over. It couldn't be. There was always the possibility of a counterattack. There had to be more. "Commander, we need to go." Virith's voice broke through his thoughts, urgent. "The pods are ready. We have to leave now, or we'll be caught in the blast." Zalrin didn't respond immediately. His hands were clenched into fists, his mind calculating the situation, running through every possibility. Every option felt like a path to oblivion. They were survivors now, no longer the mighty Council, but a broken force trying to escape the end of an era. "Go ahead," Zalrin said finally, his voice heavy. "I'll stay behind. Someone has to make sure the escape pods make it out." Virith hesitated, his eyes filled with disbelief. "Commander, you can't be serious. We need you. You." "I'm not going to abandon the Council just because we've lost a battle," Zalrin snapped, his voice steely. "Go, now. That's an order." Reluctantly, Virith nodded and turned to leave. Zalrin watched him go, his heart weighed down by the decision. He knew this was the last time he would see his officers, his crew, and perhaps the last time he would ever see any of the Council's ships in the vastness of space. Humanity had shattered everything they had built, but Zalrin refused to surrender to despair. As the last of the escape pods launched into space, Zalrin turned back to the viewport. The human warship was now within firing range, its immense weapon systems glistening with cold purpose. The battle was over, but a new war had begun. The war for the galaxy's future, for the new order humanity was determined to bring. Then, Zalrin did something he hadn't expected. He activated the ship's remaining defenses, the last vestige of the Council's power. He wasn't sure why. It wouldn't change anything. Humanity had already won, but perhaps it was his way of saying that the Council would never go down without fighting. The warship's massive form loomed closer, its weapons charging up for the final blow. But Zalrin wasn't finished yet. He opened the comms, sending a final message to the warship. "You've won, humanity, but don't think for a second that this galaxy will bend so easily to your will. We fought for centuries, and though you've brought us to the brink of extinction, the Council will live on. As long as we breathe, as long as a single one of us remains, there will always be resistance." It was a message he wasn't sure would be heard. It was more a declaration to himself than to humanity. But it was all he had left. Then, with a final glance at the oncoming warship, Zalrin took a deep breath, bracing for the inevitable. The warship fired. The blast was swift and devastating. The flagship, already on the verge of collapse, shattered under the immense pressure. The hull ruptured, sending debris scattering across the stars. For a brief, shining moment, it felt like everything in the galaxy had come to an end. The Council, in all its glory and power, was no more. But even as the flagship exploded into a burst of light, there was something that still lingered, something deep in Zalrin's heart that would not be extinguished. It was the realization that, despite everything, humanity could not wipe away the legacy of the Council. It might erase them from the stars, but it could not erase what they had built. They had been a force of nature, shaping the galaxy, leaving their mark on every corner of the cosmos. And in that final moment, as the flames of the explosion danced across the sky, Zalrin understood that this was not the end of the story. It was merely the beginning of a new chapter, one that humanity would soon learn was far more complicated than they ever imagined. The human warship, for all its might, would learn that the galaxy could not be controlled so easily. And one day in the future, when humanity's power was stretched thin, or when the galaxy itself began to unravel under the weight of their control, there would be others, other beings, other forces, ready to step in and take back what had been lost. Humanity had won this battle, but the galaxy was not theirs to rule forever. As the remnants of the Council's fleet drifted into the cold emptiness of space, Zalrin's final thoughts were clear. The war for the galaxy was far from over. The fight for survival, for freedom, for the future of every race, species, and empire that lived in the stars would continue. And one day, the Council would return. Perhaps not in the way they had been before, but they would return, in one form or another. For now, humanity would reign supreme. But Zalrin knew something they didn't. There was always a price to pay for power. And the cost of ruling the galaxy would be higher than they could ever imagine.